Part 3. Working with Specific Problems and Perfectionism. Chapter 10. Perfectionism and Depression. The nature of depression. You have probably experienced a period of sadness or depression following a significant loss in your life. Perhaps it was following the breakup of a relationship, death of someone close to you, loss of a job, or inability to achieve some goal. For most people, losses such as these tend to trigger periods of sadness, depression, or grieving. Most people also experience sadness from time to time, even in the absence of a significant loss. They may feel overwhelmed with work, hurt by the behavior of a significant person in their lives, or lonely for no particular reason. Sadness and depression are universal emotions. Although sadness is a normal experience for all people, sometimes feelings of depression can be so intense or chronic that they begin to interfere with a person's ability to enjoy life or function in his or her environment. The severity of depression, for example, the intensity, frequency, and impact of feeling sad, is on a continuum from very mild to very severe. Although this chapter is written for people who experience a level of depression that interferes with their lives, people who experience depression at mild levels may still find the information helpful, particularly if their depressed feelings are related in part to not meeting their own expectations for themselves or for other people. Normal feelings of sadness. Psychologist Sidney Blott and his colleagues have identified 3 components of normal depressed mood: dependency, self-criticism, and inefficacy. Although these components are present in normal depressed mood, they also tend to be present in clinical depression, often at a much greater intensity. Dependency. Dependency is the perception of needing help and support from other people. When people are feeling sad, they tend to want to be around other people. So, after doing poorly on an exam or receiving a poor evaluation at work, you may feel inclined to go out with friends or to spend a quiet evening at home with your family or your partner. Or, when feeling sad, you may be inclined to phone a close friend just to talk. Of course, not everyone responds this way when feeling down. Some people may isolate themselves when feeling sad, particularly if the depression is more severe. Even so, there still may be a perception of helplessness and a desire for support from other people. Self-criticism. Self-criticism is a tendency to exaggerate one's faults. A number of researchers have demonstrated a phenomenon known as state-dependent memory. In general, when people are in a particular emotional state, for example, feeling sad, they are more likely to recall previous periods when they felt the same way, as well as past events that are consistent with their low mood. For example, if you are feeling sad following the breakup of a relationship, you may tend to remember all of the problems with your previous relationships. You may also exaggerate all of your own shortcomings that you believe contributed to the breakup. Similarly, if you're feeling sad about doing poorly on a task at work, you may dwell on all the ways that you don't measure up to your coworkers' performances or to your own standards. Inefficacy. Inefficacy is a sense that important events are independent of your actions. In other words, you may believe at times that no matter what you do, you cannot influence the outcome of events. For example, being rejected by other people, losing close people in your life, doing poorly in school, having financial problems, or experiencing other significant life stresses. This feeling of helplessness or a lack of control often goes along with feeling sad or depressed. Although sadness is a normal part of life for everyone, some people experience levels of depression that interfere with their ability to function properly at work, at home, or in their relationships. When depression is severe enough to cause significant impairment, it is often referred to as clinical depression. Clinical depression. Researchers and clinicians in the mental health field have identified a number of specific problems, collectively known as mood disorders, that are defined in part by the presence of depression. In this chapter, we limit our discussion to two of these disorders that are most often associated with perfectionism. These are major depressive disorder and dysthymic disorder. Major depressive disorder. Major depressive disorder is a mood disorder in which an individual has experienced one or more major depressive episodes. A major depressive episode is a period lasting at least 2 weeks in which a person consistently experiences depressed mood or a loss of interest in almost all of his or her normal activities. In addition, the person experiences several additional symptoms, which may include changes in weight or appetite, changes in sleep, feeling very restless or very slowed down, loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness or excessive guilt, poor concentration or difficulty making decisions, and thoughts about death or suicide. Although major depressive episodes are defined as lasting at least 2 weeks, they more typically last up to several months. The average age at which major depressive disorder begins is in the mid-20s, although the problem can begin at any age, including during childhood. Some people experience only a single episode of major depression, perhaps triggered by a stressful life event. For others, depression may be long-lasting or may be associated with a series of briefer episodes. For people who experience more than one major depressive episode, mood may return back to normal between episodes, or there may still be some minor symptoms of depression left over after the full-blown episode has improved. Dysthymic disorder. People with dysthymic disorder experience sadness and depression over a longer period, and usually at a milder level relative to people with major depressive disorder. Technically, to receive a diagnosis of dysthymic disorder, a person must experience a period of 2 years or longer in which he or she feels sad or depressed most of the day on most days. Although the minimum duration is 2 years, people with dysthymic disorder often report having felt down and blue for many years. In addition to the low mood, people with dysthymic disorder must experience at least 2 additional symptoms, which may include changes in appetite, changes in sleep, low energy, poor self-esteem, poor concentration or difficulty making decisions, and feelings of hopelessness. As you can see, major depressive disorder and dysthymic disorder share many features. Nevertheless, there are important differences. Major depressive disorder is typically associated with discrete episodes, whereas dysthymic disorder is generally more long-lasting. Second, a major depressive episode must be associated with depressed mood or loss of interest, in addition to the other associated symptoms, day after day for the required period of 2 weeks or longer. In contrast, people with dysthymic disorder do not necessarily feel down every day, just most days. Finally, the intensity of the depression tends to be much worse in major depressive disorder than in dysthymic disorder. Causes of depression. If you have had significant problems with depression, you may have had one professional or another tell you that your depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in your brain, problems in the way your parents brought you up, genetics, or any number of other factors. Despite the many different theories that have been proposed to explain depression, we don't really know the cause of depression. In fact, it now seems that depression is caused by many different factors, and that different people may experience depression for different reasons. Although researchers are beginning to get a clearer understanding about the variables that contribute to depression, they still cannot determine the cause of depression for any one person. However, the problem does seem to be due to a complex interaction of both biological and psychological processes. Biological factors. Depression is very much influenced by our biology, including our genetic makeup, brain chemistry, and other factors. We'll discuss the role of biology in depression in this section. Genetics. A number of studies have demonstrated that depression runs in families. For example, averaging across studies, a person is up to 3 times more likely to suffer from major depressive disorder if he or she has a parent who suffers from the problem than if there is no depression in the immediate family. Of course, the fact that depression runs in families does not, in and of itself, mean that depression is inherited genetically. It could be that depression is learned from growing up in a home with other people who are depressed. To demonstrate a genetic basis for a problem such as depression, scientists must turn to twin studies, adoption studies, and studies that directly measure the presence and absence of genes that are believed to be related to depression. In general, there is some evidence, particularly from twin studies, that depression is in part genetically based. However, the evidence from other genetic research methods has been mixed. Although genetics may be important in the development of depression for some individuals, it should be pointed out that depression is not inherited in the same way as traits, for instance, eye color. Genetics may predispose people to develop depression, but it is no guarantee. Even in pairs of identical twins, who are genetically identical, it is not unusual for one twin to experience depression and the other one to be free of it. Neurotransmitters. Many studies have examined the relationship between neurotransmitter levels and depression. Neurotransmitters are chemicals in the brain that are responsible for sending messages from one nerve cell to another. In general, the neurotransmitter model of depression that has obtained the most support suggests that depression is associated with low levels of serotonin and/or norepinephrine. Neurotransmitter models of depression are based in part on the fact that medications that raise levels of these substances seem to improve depression. In addition, there is other evidence supporting a role for these transmitters in depression. However, the relationship between neurotransmitters and depression is complex, and doctors cannot simply measure how much serotonin or norepinephrine there is in the brain to see if there is an imbalance. Other biological factors. Numerous other biological processes are thought to be involved with depression in some people. Hormonal levels probably play a role in some types of depression. In addition, abuse of alcohol and other drugs can increase a person's likelihood of developing depression. Finally, factors such as the amount of exposure to sunlight and even sleep patterns may have an effect on depressed mood. Psychological factors. Many studies have shown that psychological factors are important in the development and maintenance of depression. For example, various life stresses, for example physical or sexual abuse, divorce, unemployment, may put certain people at risk for depression. Also, a person's style of thinking can increase his or her chances of feeling depressed. One of the most influential psychological theories of depression describes how thinking contributes to feeling depressed. This model, proposed by Dr. Aaron Beck and colleagues, is known as the cognitive theory of depression. Beck proposed that depression is associated with a tendency to think negatively about the self, for instance, I never seem to achieve anything I set out to do, the world, for example, nobody cares about me, and the future, thoughts such as things will never improve. In addition to these 3 types of thinking, Beck also emphasized the role of other negative beliefs, for example, I have to be perfect, and tendencies to interpret situations in a negatively biased way. There are other psychological theories of depression as well, several of which overlap considerably with Beck's approach, in that they propose that thoughts and interpretations play an important role in maintaining depression. You may wish to review Chapter 3 regarding the role of thoughts in perfectionism. Many of the thoughts and beliefs that contribute to perfectionism are relevant to depression as well. Perfectionism and depression. Recall from Chapter 1 the three types of perfectionism: self-oriented perfectionism, a tendency to set unreasonably high standards for one's own behavior; other-oriented perfectionism, a tendency to demand that others meet your unrealistically high standards; and socially prescribed perfectionism, the belief that others have impossible standards and that you must meet these standards in order to win their approval. Researchers have examined the relationship between these types of perfectionism and the symptoms of depression and have reported a number of interesting findings. People with high levels of perfectionism, particularly self-oriented perfectionism and socially prescribed perfectionism, are at a greater risk of experiencing depression than non-perfectionists, especially during periods of stress, for example at school, work, and in their relationships, and after experiencing failure. For example, people who operate with a high level of perfectionism may be susceptible to depression at a time when they have a lot of tests at school, especially if they don't do as well on some of these tests as they would have liked. Self-oriented perfectionism increases the risk that a depressed individual will continue to feel depressed a year later if the person is under high levels of stress related to his or her work or school, but not if stress is more focused on his or her relationships. Socially prescribed perfectionism is associated with feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, both of which have been shown to be components of depression. Perfectionism appears to be related to other specific aspects of depression, such as tendencies to think negatively about oneself and to believe that important events are independent of one's actions. Although it is normal for depression to improve over time, even without treatment, perfectionism tends to remain stable over time. In these ways, perfectionism can put people at risk for developing depression, particularly if the person has experienced certain life stresses or failures. The relationship between perfectionism and depression is not surprising. Perfectionism is the tendency to set unrealistically high standards. Because these standards are unlikely to be met, a person who holds such high standards is bound to fall short of meeting them. Frequent experiences of failure can make a person feel helpless and inadequate, and may eventually make a person feel hopeless about things ever improving. Therefore, if perfectionism and depression are both problems for you, you may find that learning to accept lower standards helps you to feel less depressed. Treatments for depression that are supported by research. Depression can be effectively treated using a number of approaches. In this section, we discuss 3 of these, including cognitive behavioral therapy, interpersonal psychotherapy, and medications. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Chapters 7 and 8 discuss many of the components of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, in detail, so we will only provide a brief recap here. Basically, the cognitive part of CBT refers to techniques used to help people change their negative and unrealistic beliefs, attitudes, and expectations. These techniques include teaching people to identify their negative beliefs, examine the evidence supporting and refuting their beliefs, and engage in small experiments to test out the validity of their beliefs. Behavioral strategies are designed to change behaviors that maintain negative feelings and thoughts. These may include exposure to situations that are anxiety-provoking, role-playing or practicing difficult interactions that are likely to come up in the future, and learning to communicate more effectively. Interpersonal psychotherapy for depression, IPT. Interpersonal psychotherapy for depression, IPT, is one of the few psychological treatments other than CBT that has consistently been shown to be effective for depression. This approach to treatment is based on the premise that depression stems from problems in interpersonal relationships. Treatment usually lasts 15 to 20 sessions and tends to be focused on one or more of the following areas of interpersonal functioning: interpersonal role disputes, for example, problems adjusting to the demands of a particular social role, such as being a father, employee, daughter, and so on; interpersonal losses, such as the loss of a close friend or relative; interpersonal deficits, for example, difficulty communicating effectively with your spouse; and interpersonal role transitions, things like difficulty coping with life changes such as graduation, divorce, retirement, and so on. In studies comparing IPT to medication and CBT, IPT appears to be as effective as these other approaches. Antidepressant medications. Here is a partial list of medications that have been shown to be useful for treating clinical depression. As you can see, the list is quite long. These drugs are organized with respect to their effects on particular neurotransmitter brain chemical systems that are believed to be involved in depression, such as the ones that involve serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. We have included both the generic name as well as the brand name for each medication. Antidepressant medications. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. Citalopram, Celexa. Escitalopram, Lexapro, Cipralex. Fluoxetine, Prozac. Fluvoxamine, Luvox. Paroxetine, Paxil. Sertraline, Zoloft. Selective dopamine reuptake inhibitors, SDRI. Bupropion, Wellbutrin. Selective serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, SNRIs. Duloxetine, Cymbalta. Venlafaxine, Effexor. Noradrenergic specific serotonergic antidepressant, NASSA. Mirtazapine, Remeron. Non-selective cyclic antidepressants, sometimes called tricyclic and heterocyclic antidepressants. Amitriptyline, Elavil. Clomipramine, Anafranil. Dizipramine, Norpramin. Imipramine, Tofranil. Nortriptyline, Aventil or Pamelor. Trazodone, Deserel. Monoamine oxidase inhibitors, MAOIs. Phenelzine, Nardil. Tranylcypromine, Parnate. Reversible inhibitors of monoamine oxidase A, RIMA. Meclobamide, Manarix, not available in the United States. All of the medications listed in the table are associated with side effects, which may include such symptoms as dry mouth, headache, dizziness, upset stomach, sexual difficulties, weight gain, insomnia, or other symptoms depending on the medication. Some antidepressant medications may interact with other prescription medications, over-the-counter medications, alcohol, illegal and recreational drugs, or even certain foods, in the case of MAOI antidepressants. We recommend that you discuss possible side effects and drug interactions with your doctor if you are interested in trying an antidepressant, or any medication for that matter. Although side effects are relatively common, many people are able to tolerate antidepressant treatment with no side effects. Furthermore, when side effects do occur, they are often mild and tend to improve with time or adjustment of the dosage. Nevertheless, in rare cases, some medications may be associated with more severe side effects. Ask your doctor about the side effects of any specific medication that he or she recommends. With such a long list of available antidepressants, how does one choose one antidepressant over another? There are several factors that come into play. The first is effectiveness. Your doctor should recommend a medication that has been shown to be effective for your pattern of symptoms. Second, your doctor should take into account the side effect profile of the medication, as well as possible effects on medical conditions that you may have. Third, Your doctor should consider possible interactions with other medications that you may be taking, as well as interactions with alcohol and other drugs that you may use occasionally. Fourth, the cost of the pills varies from medication to medication. If cost is an issue, for example, if you don't have a drug plan, you should mention it to your doctor. Finally, the decision of which medication to use should be influenced by your past responses to particular medications. If one medication was effective and well tolerated in the past, it might make sense to try it again. If you have a history of not responding to an adequate dosage of a medication in the past, perhaps this time you should try a different medication. If a particular medication does not work for you, don't give up. First, you should make sure you are on an adequate dosage. Doctors are often concerned that patients will be unable to tolerate the specific medication, so the initial recommended dosages are often too low to be effective. If you are able to tolerate the medication, the dose will usually be increased over the first few weeks of use to a dose likely to be effective. If you're not sure whether you are on an adequate dosage, obtain a second opinion from another family doctor or psychiatrist. Second, antidepressants take a few weeks to work. It's not uncommon for people to take these medications for up to 6 or even 8 weeks before noticing any benefit. Third, if a particular medication does not work for you, there are other options. There may be another medication that is effective for you, or you may benefit from a psychological treatment such as CBT or IPT. Finally, it is possible to boost the effects of some antidepressants using other medications such as lithium carbonate. Lithium is normally used to treat bipolar disorder or manic depression, a problem in which people experience both extreme highs and lows in mood. However, when used in conjunction with an antidepressant, lithium has been shown for some people to improve upon the benefits achieved by an antidepressant alone. Electroconvulsive therapy. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, is often administered after all other treatments for depression have been attempted and failed, unless the person is very seriously ill, in which case it may be recommended as an initial treatment. ECT is still very controversial and is often discussed in a negative light by the media. Today, ECT is very different than the way it has been portrayed in movies such as One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The procedure is done under anesthetic and involves inducing stimulation of the brain by delivering a shock to the brain lasting less than a second. The seizures that used to be triggered during ECT are now suppressed by the use of muscle relaxants. The main side effect of ECT is confusion and loss of short-term memory that lasts for about a week or two. Despite these side effects, many individuals who do not respond to medications may find ECT to be effective for depression. A more recent development is transcranial magnetic stimulation, which uses magnetic waves to stimulate the brain while the person remains fully conscious. This treatment is done as an outpatient procedure, as is ECT, and people go home or onto their workplace after the session. How to change perfectionistic thinking and behavior in depression. For a detailed review of all the strategies for overcoming perfectionism, see chapters 7 through 9. In this section, we will highlight some of the techniques that may be helpful for you if you suffer from depressed mood or if you tend to feel down when your expectations are not met. Changing perfectionistic thoughts that contribute to depression. You may recall from chapter 7 that we recommend following 5 steps for changing perfectionistic thoughts: identifying perfectionistic thoughts, listing more reasonable alternative thoughts, reassessing the advantages and disadvantages of the original thoughts and the alternative thoughts, and choosing a more realistic or helpful way of viewing situations. In addition, we suggest a variety of specific techniques that can be helpful for changing perfectionistic thoughts. Several of these will be particularly helpful for individuals who tend to feel sad or depressed. These include examining the evidence, taking another perspective, compromising with yourself, hypothesis testing, changing your social comparison habits, and looking at the big picture. Others may be helpful as well, so it is worth looking over the material in Chapter 7 for further possibilities. In the case of depression, you should pay particular attention to depressive beliefs about yourself, such as beliefs that you are worthless, incompetent, or generally deficient in some way. If you hold these beliefs, you may find it helpful to think carefully about what these labels mean. Sometimes, attempting to define labels such as worthless and incompetent will lead you to realize that these words do not really capture who you are, or who anyone is for that matter. Consider the following therapy vignette. In this vignette, the therapist uses the strategy of taking another perspective to help Jonathan to evaluate his own worth using the same criteria that he uses to judge other people. Jonathan: most days, I feel completely worthless. I just sit around the house and nothing seems to get done. Therapist: let's look at the word worthless. Exactly what does that word mean to you? Jonathan: well, I suppose that a worthless person is someone who doesn't contribute to society and doesn't do anything. Someone like me. Therapist: can you think of anyone else who you would describe as worthless? Jonathan: actually, no, I can't. Therapist: if you were to meet someone else who is worthless, how would you know it? Jonathan: I don't really think of other people as being worthless. Therapist: what if you met a person who, like yourself, was unemployed and not spending time with friends? Would you consider that person to be worthless? Jonathan: not at all. If anything, I would feel for that person. Therapist: it seems that you have different standards for yourself than you do for other people. Is it possible to change your view of yourself to match the view that you might have of another person who is similar to you? Jonathan: I guess it's possible that I'm not worthless, although I still believe that there are lots of things in my life that need to change. Here is another therapy vignette that illustrates how a therapist helps Andrea to change social comparison strategies that may contribute to her depressed feelings. Andrea: my daughter's report card just arrived, and it was just average. To make things worse, my nephew is doing very well in school. I know my brother is going to tell me about my nephew's report card, and I'm going to feel terrible. Therapist: why will you feel terrible? Andrea: my daughter should be doing at least as well as my nephew. I feel that her report card reflects badly on me. Therapist: how do your nephew's grades compare to everyone else's in the class? Andrea: he is always at the top of the class. That just makes it worse. Therapist: what effect does it have to compare your daughter's report card to that of the top student in the class? Andrea: it makes me feel miserable. Therapist: people can be measured in many different dimensions, including physical appearance, intelligence, artistic talent, physical fitness, aptitude for sports, knowledge of particular topics, physical health, income, school performance, and the list goes on and on. In fact, each of these dimensions can be subdivided into other dimensions. For example, physical appearance includes such things as height, weight, hair color, complexion, and so on. Each of us performs well in some of these dimensions. In other dimensions, we may perform poorly compared to most people. However, in most dimensions, we tend to be somewhere in between. In other words, average. Andrea: now that you mention it, there are lots of ways in which my daughter really outshines my nephew. He just studies all the time, but my daughter has lots of outside interests and is quite good at sports. In addition to changing negative thoughts about yourself, you should also examine your negative thoughts and absolutes about the world. For instance, people should always be interested in what I have to say, and about the future. For example, I will never find a relationship that makes me happy. Not only are thoughts such as these usually untrue, but they also contribute to feelings of depression. Changing perfectionistic behaviors that contribute to depression. A number of strategies may be helpful for dealing with perfectionistic behaviors that are associated with depression. Exposure exercises designed to disprove perfectionistic beliefs can reduce the intensity of these beliefs. Exposure can help reduce depression in other ways as well. Often, when people are feeling depressed, they tend to become socially withdrawn and uninterested in their usual hobbies and activities. Therefore, they begin to avoid doing things because they believe that they are unlikely to enjoy themselves. The net result of the avoidance, however, is to decrease the person's enjoyment of life, thereby contributing to the depression and the lack of motivation to do things. Exposure can have the effect of breaking that cycle. By forcing yourself to do things that normally are interesting to you, chances are that you may enjoy them more than you might expect. Going places and doing things, despite not having the energy or interest in being active, may help to increase your interest in doing things over time. For more details on how to conduct exposure practices, see Chapter 8. In addition to exposure, several of the other behavioral strategies discussed in Chapter 8 may be helpful. For example, if you tend to have difficulty communicating directly and assertively when you're feeling down, you may find some of the suggestions regarding assertive communication helpful. In addition, procrastination can often be a problem for people who are feeling depressed. Check out Chapter 8 for methods of overcoming procrastination. Chapter 11. Perfectionism and Anger. Like sadness and fear, anger is a universal emotion that is experienced by everyone. Despite the fact that all people feel anger from time to time, most people don't enjoy feeling angry, and they may even feel embarrassed about expressing anger in front of others. The experience of anger is often associated with other feelings, such as irritation, disappointment, rage, or a feeling of hatred and dislike toward another person, a situation, or even yourself. When feeling angry, you may also experience a desire to be aggressive or destructive, or you may feel the urge to seek revenge toward another person who has let you down. Usually, anger is associated with a sense of blame. That is, when you feel angry, you are probably assigning blame to another individual or yourself for behaving in an unacceptable way. Also, anger is typically associated with strong beliefs about the way a situation should be. Although anger can increase the likelihood of aggression, there is little evidence to support a strong relationship between anger and aggression in general. Anger prepares you to be aggressive if the need arises, but it does not cause aggression directly. Most people, across situations, are able to control their anger and prevent it from leading to verbal or physical attacks on others. Furthermore, even when a person is aggressive, it is often not related to anger, but rather to a need for dominance or control. For example, people who injure their victims during a robbery have probably not been provoked in any way, and probably aren't angry at the victim. Similarly, when children tease or hurt other children in the schoolyard, it probably has little to do with anger, and more to do with a desire to dominate the other person or look strong in front of peers. People differ with respect to their threshold for feeling anger. An experience that might cause anger for one person may not have the same effect on another individual. Although some drivers become very angry when other drivers make mistakes, such as cutting off another car, tailgating, driving too slowly, or going through a red light, this anger toward other drivers is often referred to as road rage in the media. Other drivers tolerate these situations without much reaction. As we discussed in previous chapters, perfectionism puts people at risk for becoming angry more easily. If you tend to have high standards that are rigid and inflexible, you are at risk for not having your standards and expectations met. Not being able to achieve a goal is one of several common triggers for anger. Common triggers for anger. Psychologist Carol Izzard identified 3 common triggers for anger: restraint, interruption of goal-oriented behavior, and aversive stimulation. We will consider each of these in turn. Restraint. Restraint involves some force blocking your desired actions in a particular situation. Restraint can be physical or psychological in nature. Physical restraint involves actually holding a person down in order to prevent him or her from doing something or going somewhere. Studies show that even infants as young as 4 months old respond with anger when their arms are restrained. Psychological restraint involves being prevented from doing something by some social or psychological force. For example, having to follow particular rules or regulations to avoid getting in trouble. You probably recognize the experience of becoming angry when you are restrained or prevented from doing something that you want to do. As a teenager, you may have become angry when your parents prevented you from going out with friends. As an adult, you may become angry when you get into your car, only to realize that the tire is flat and you are going to be late for an appointment. Interruption of goal-oriented behavior. Interruption of goal-oriented behavior is very similar to restraint in that a person is prevented from reaching a particular goal. An example is feeling angry when you are interrupted while concentrating on a task, such as reading a book, watching a good movie, or filling out your income tax forms. Although most people enjoy breaks from time to time, uninvited interruptions may be less welcome for some people, especially when there is a perceived pressure to finish a task by a certain time. Because perfectionism can often be associated with high standards for performance or a drive to finish jobs quickly, being interrupted is more likely to be a trigger for anger among perfectionistic people. Aversive stimulation. Aversive stimulation involves being exposed to an unpleasant stimulus, such as extreme cold or heat, intense pain, a loud noise, a nasty odor, or a morally offensive comment. For example, if you are shopping in a crowded shopping mall, you may become irritable following several hours of exposure to noise, crowds, and uncomfortable stuffiness, especially if you're wearing warm clothing. Other triggers for anger. There are many other possible triggers for anger. For example, most people feel angry when they have been deceived, treated poorly, or hurt by another person. In addition, you probably have had times when disapproval from others has led you to feel angry. You may also feel anger toward others even when their behavior is not directed at you. For instance, feeling angry at your best friend's boss when you find out that your best friend was unjustly fired, feeling angry at a politician for making a decision that you don't agree with. Anger can be directed at yourself as well. If you make a mistake on an important job at work, you may feel angry for not doing the perfect job that you had anticipated. You may even feel angry about feeling angry. It is not unusual for people to experience anger toward themselves if they lose control when feeling angry toward another person. When is anger a problem? Chronic problems with anger can contribute to high blood pressure, heart disease, excess stomach acid, and other physical problems. Interpersonally, anger can lead to less intimate relationships, as friends, co-workers, and family members learn to avoid talking about certain issues in order to prevent themselves from being the victims of your anger. In extreme cases, people may avoid you completely, leading to complete social isolation. Finally, continual displays of anger can affect your self-esteem by making you feel guilty, embarrassed, out of control, or inadequate. Although anger is a normal emotion that everyone experiences, it can be problematic when it happens too frequently, when it happens too intensely, when it leads to physical or psychological aggression, when it leads to relationship difficulties, and when it leads to any other types of significant impairment in a person's life. For example, individuals who are so angry that they cannot work on their term paper that is due the next day, people who get fired for telling their boss what they really think of him or her. The development of anger. The experience and expression of anger is mediated by a complex interaction among various biological and psychological factors. As we mentioned earlier, there is evidence that the capacity to express anger is present from infancy. In addition, many animals are capable of expressing anger, often in ways that are very similar to the expression of anger in humans. From a biological perspective, the limbic system, including the hypothalamus and amygdala, has been implicated in the expression of anger. In addition, your learning experiences during childhood probably have a large impact on how you express anger. There is evidence that parents are more tolerant of anger in boys than in girls. Researchers have found that parents of boys tend to respond to anger with attention, which may strengthen the angry behavior. In contrast, parents are more likely to tell their daughters that their anger is inappropriate and instruct them to stop being angry. This pattern seems to continue in adults. Men who express anger in the workplace are generally viewed more positively than men who express sadness, and their anger is often assumed to be related to external circumstances. For example, he is angry because of something that happened to him. In contrast, women who express anger in the workplace are viewed, by both men and women, more negatively, and their anger is more likely to be attributed to internal factors. For instance, she is an angry person. Other research has lent further support to the view that behavior by parents contributes to the expression of anger in children. For example, one study found that toddlers are more likely to express anger frequently if their parents respond to their problem behaviors with anger. In contrast, parents who respond to toddlers with other emotions, such as fear or sadness, are more likely to have children with fewer behavioral problems and a well-developed capacity to empathize with other people. It should be noted that behavior by parents is not the only social influence on the way a person expresses anger. There is also evidence that a child's peer group has an impact on the development and maintenance of anger and anger-related behavior. Because anger is a universal emotion influenced by such factors as brain functioning and childhood learning experiences, you may be tempted to assume that there is nothing you can do to change your angry behavior. Nothing could be further from the truth. More than 50 studies have investigated the effectiveness of cognitive and behavioral treatments for anger, and overall, this approach to treating anger has been shown to be quite effective. Learning to change the thoughts and behaviors that help to maintain your difficulties with anger is the best way to overcome the problem. The role of thoughts in anger. When you respond with anger, it is not the situation or event that leads you to react, but rather your interpretation of the situation or event. For example, imagine that your child arrives home from school and hands you a midterm report card. Upon examining the report card, you notice failing grades in math and science. How would you respond to this situation? What emotions would you be feeling? What thoughts might you be having? Now, imagine how other people you know might respond to this situation. Think about specific people, such as your partner, family members, co-workers, and so on. Would any of them respond differently to this situation than you? Can you imagine another person feeling differently when confronted with this situation? There are many different ways that a parent might respond. Furthermore, the specific reaction is likely to be influenced by the person's beliefs about the situation. Here are some examples of thoughts that might be associated with particular emotional reactions in response to a child's disappointing report card. Emotions and thoughts. Emotion: angry. Thoughts: my child did not study hard enough. My child should have performed better. My child is making me look bad by not doing well in school. Emotion: sad. Thoughts: if I were a better parent, my child would be doing better in school. My child will never amount to anything. Emotion: concerned. Thoughts: My child must be feeling terrible about this. What if my child cannot pull up these grades by the end of the year? Emotion, neutral. Thoughts. There is still time for these grades to improve. Perhaps a tutor could help my child raise the math and science grades. I had some poor grades when I was in high school. A couple of poor grades won't matter much in the long run. In this example, you can see how the specific beliefs that you hold affect your emotional response to the situation. By examining the accuracy of your angry beliefs and trying to change them to be more realistic and moderate, you will find it easier to control your anger. Perfectionism and anger. Perfectionism can lead to anger when you apply your unreasonably high expectations and standards to other people. You may also become angry at yourself when you do not meet your own specific goals or expectations. Any belief that you have about how you or other people should be puts you at risk for feeling angry if these expectations are not met. Beware of statements or thoughts that include words such as should and must, especially when they are accompanied by words such as always and never. Examples of perfectionistic expectations that may lead to anger when they are not met include the following. I should never be late for appointments. My doctor should be able to diagnose and treat any symptom I have. My children should always dress the way I want them to. People should never tell lies, even white lies. Nice people never talk about others behind their backs. I should lose 5 pounds. My children must never swear. People should never eat with their hands. People should always do exactly what they say they will do. Changing perfectionistic thoughts and behaviors that contribute to anger. Chapters 7, 8, and 9 contain many different strategies that are useful for combating the thoughts and behaviors that are associated with perfectionism, including those that contribute to anger. You may wish to review these chapters. The remaining sections of this chapter highlight a number of strategies that are especially helpful for dealing with anger. Become aware of your anger before it becomes intense. People are often unaware of their anger, especially when it is at low levels. Therefore, the first step to reducing your anger is to increase your ability to detect anger before it gets out of hand. Be aware of subtle signs that you may be feeling angry. These may include a tendency to use sarcastic comments or put-downs, a feeling of tension in your body, being grouchy or irritable, or being overly sensitive to comments from other people. If you are in a situation where things are not going your way, be aware of whether you are becoming angry and take steps to keep the anger from getting the best of you. Some possible strategies are described throughout the rest of this chapter. When anger is very intense, and may be hard to think clearly, so catching it early can be helpful. In fact, you can even deal with the anger before it happens. If you anticipate being angry in a situation, try to challenge your angry thoughts before they occur. For example, if you are expecting a negative performance appraisal in an upcoming meeting with your boss, plan how to deal with the situation before it happens. Before the meeting, brainstorm possible ways of dealing with the situation that are unlikely to be damaging to you or your situation at work. Challenge your perfectionistic thoughts. Rather than accepting your angry thoughts as facts, test out their validity by using the strategies discussed in Chapter 7. Examine the evidence supporting your angry beliefs. Search for other ways of interpreting the situation. The following therapy vignette illustrates how to make your standards more flexible in order to become more tolerant and decrease your angry feelings. Beth: my daughter just came home from college with a lip ring, and I'm absolutely furious. Therapist: what bothers you about the piercing? Beth: it looks repulsive. Also, I'm worried that when other people see it, it will cause problems for her. Nobody will ever find her attractive with that thing. Therapist: the thought that you just mentioned is a worry thought. What anger thoughts are you having? For example, do you believe that you've somehow been hurt by your daughter getting her lip pierced? Beth: Well, she knows that I don't approve of it, and she did it anyway. We've talked about it in the past, and I let her know how I feel. She has completely disregarded my feelings, and I believe that she has no respect for my opinions. Therapist: So you interpret the lip piercing as evidence that your daughter doesn't respect your opinions. Are there other possible interpretations? Beth: Not that I can think of. Therapist: Would you say that any time a person decides to purchase a piece of clothing or adopt a new hairstyle that another person does not find attractive, it is a sign of disrespect? Beth: Of course not, but this is different. This is such a radical change. Therapist: Can you think of anything that you may have done in the past that your own parents thought was radical or inappropriate? Beth: Actually, when I got my ears pierced, my parents didn't talk to me for a week. Therapist: Today, the role of body piercing is not very different from that of ear piercing 40 years ago. If you look around the city, there are many people your daughter's age who have a piercing in one place or another. Beth: What if she can't find a job after graduation because of her lip ring? It's possible that employers out there will see it the way I do. Therapist: Let me throw the question back at you. What if she can't get a job because of the lip ring? Beth: I guess she will take out the lip ring or find a place to work where it doesn't matter. I can see what you're getting at. Even though I don't like it, it's not as bad as I thought at first. In general, asking yourself some of the following questions may help you to challenge the perfectionistic thoughts that contribute to your anger. Is this situation really as important as it feels? What if this situation doesn't go my way? Does it really matter? Do I need to control this situation? Is my way the only way to view this situation? Would another person necessarily see this situation the same way as I do? What if things don't work out the way I want them to? Do I know for sure that things will turn out badly if I don't get my way? Will getting angry result in the outcome that I want? Allow people to be different than you. People like to be around other people who share important beliefs, attitudes, and values. People who are overly perfectionistic, however, may insist that other people conform to their way of thinking and doing things, even for matters that aren't terribly important. To be less of a perfectionist, you will need to allow other people to be themselves, even if it means that you don't agree with their choices of clothing, hairstyle, career, relationships, and so on. This doesn't mean that anything goes. In all relationships, there are limitations to what people find acceptable. Most people don't tolerate being lied to or stolen from by friends or coworkers. Similarly, parents generally don't allow their children to do things that are very dangerous. The goal should not be to have no standards, but rather to have more flexible standards. If you can distinguish between standards that are appropriate and others that are unrealistic or excessively high, you will run less of a risk of experiencing unwarranted anger toward other people. Avoid using angry language. Angry language can help fuel angry feelings. For example, labeling other people as jerks, idiots, incompetent, irresponsible, and so on can make it difficult to change the way you think about them. If you are tempted to label another person, try labeling his or her behavior instead. For example, if your housemate has not taken out the garbage in a few weeks, rather than saying, "My housemate is lazy and inconsiderate," try saying, "My housemate has not taken out the garbage in a few weeks." In addition to avoiding labeling, it can be helpful to make it a habit to think before you speak, particularly when you're angry. Before saying what's on your mind, imagine hearing the words that you are about to say. Would you find the words helpful if someone said them to you? If not, keep your thoughts to yourself. You don't have to say everything you're thinking. Assume responsibility for your actions. As we discussed earlier, Anger is often caused by blaming another person for a problem, or holding on to rigid beliefs about how something should be. To overcome a problem with excessive anger, it's important to understand all the different factors that contribute to a situation, including your own role. Situations are often complex, and rarely is a particular person entirely responsible for a problem or situation. Imagine that you confided in your friend Tom that you didn't like his friend Allison. If Tom told Allison how you felt about her, you might feel angry and betrayed because Tom has talked about you behind your back. Although it's true that Tom may have made a mistake in this situation, it would be important for you to assume some responsibility for what happened as well. By telling Tom about your feelings toward Allison, you would also be guilty of gossiping. Also, you would be in part responsible for the information getting back to Allison. Similarly, arguments and disagreements are rarely the fault of any one person. Rather, they are usually determined by a complex interaction of many different factors, including the specific situation that two people are arguing about, the manner in which each person is discussing the topic, tone and volume of voice, body language, use of sarcastic comments and insults, and so on, the personal state of each person, fatigue, hunger, anxious or depressed mood, previous stresses during the day, and so on, and possible miscommunication. During a disagreement, it is easy to notice all the ways in which the other person has contributed to the argument. It's much more difficult to take responsibility for your own behaviors that may have helped fuel the disagreement. Admit when you are wrong. People often believe that it is important, above all else, to be consistent. You may fear that if you back down on a particular issue, or if you change your mind, you will appear uncertain, others will not take you as seriously, and your opinion will be less respected in the future. There are situations in which this may be true. For example, a politician who makes a commitment, for example, no new taxes, during an election campaign, and then breaks the promise after being elected, may be perceived as dishonest, manipulative, or indecisive. However, in most cases, people respect other people who are able to change in the face of new information, or after realizing that they have made a mistake. If you realize that your expectations have been unreasonable, people will appreciate you admitting that you were wrong. People generally appreciate an apology when it is sincere. Practice exposure exercises. If you tend to overreact to other people doing things differently than you, structured exposure to the situation may help you to be more tolerant. For example, if it upsets you to have your partner clean up after dinner because it is never done to your high standards, arrange for your partner to clean up every day for a couple of weeks. Of course, this will depend on your partner's agreeing to participate. During the practices, your job will be to refrain from making any comments or criticisms. Over the course of the practices, you will probably become more tolerant of your partner's cleaning standards. Before beginning any exposure practices, we recommend that you review the relevant parts of Chapter 8 to make sure that the exercises are structured in a way that maximizes their effectiveness. Take some time out. Time out involves physically or mentally taking a break from a situation. For example, you might lie down, take a walk, phone a friend, watch TV, or get involved in some other activity that gets you out of the situation. Sometimes, you won't have the opportunity to physically get away from a situation. In these cases, just taking the time to count to 10 may be enough of a break to prevent you from saying something that you might regret later. Your anger is likely to decrease if you get away from the triggers that remind you of why you are angry. After a break, you are likely to see the situation in a more realistic light. Often, by the time you return to the situation, the anger will have subsided. Time out is especially helpful when your anger is too intense to make use of some of the other anger management strategies, such as challenging your angry thoughts. There are helpful and unhelpful ways of taking time out. It's best to never storm out of a room or hang up the telephone on another person. Even though this may make you feel better, the other person is likely to become more angry or hurt, and the problem will escalate. If you need to take a break, explain to the other individual that you are feeling angry and that you want some time to think about things. Be specific about how much time you need. I'll be back in an hour, or I'll phone you tomorrow. If the other person wants to continue the conversation, make an appointment to talk at a later time when your anger is likely to have decreased, and make sure you keep the appointment. Try physical exercise. Physical exercise, for example running, walking, cycling, swimming, aerobics, sports, and so on, is a good way to blow off steam. With regular exercise, you may also feel more energetic and healthy, which in turn will make it easier for you to tolerate situations that otherwise might be annoying or frustrating. Practice relaxation and meditation. Research has shown that relaxation training and mindfulness meditation can be effective ways to manage anger. There are many different methods that can be used to induce a state of relaxation or mindfulness. Progressive muscle relaxation involves learning to relax the muscles of the body to decrease feelings of tension, stress, and anxiety. Imagery, another method that is sometimes helpful, involves learning to imagine particular scenes that are relaxing. Meditation and mindfulness training can help you deal with anger and other negative emotions. Finally, learning to breathe slowly and smoothly can help you relax. A full description of each of these methods is beyond the scope of this book. However, there are a number of places where you can learn more about relaxation and meditation if you are interested. Also, you may have access near your home to classes for relaxation training, meditation, yoga, or some other activity that includes a relaxation or mindfulness component. Use problem-solving strategies. When you are faced with a conflict or problem, use the following steps to solve the problem rather than losing your temper or stewing in anger. 1. Define the problem. Until you understand exactly what the problem is, you will not be able to solve it. 2. If the problem is complex, break it down into smaller problems. Then choose one problem to work on at a time. 3. Brainstorm all possible solutions to the problem, even solutions that aren't likely to work. 4. Evaluate each solution by listing the potential costs and benefits. 5. Choose the best solutions to the problem. 6. Develop a plan for implementing the solutions. For instance, decide what steps need to be taken to make the plan work. 7. Solve the problem by carrying out the solution you have chosen. 8. Evaluate the effectiveness of the solution. If the solution was not effective, repeat the problem-solving steps until you find a solution that works. Consider the following example. Imagine you are a manager in an office where you supervise several members of the clerical staff. One of your staff members has a tendency to arrive 10 or 15 minutes late for work almost every day. As the supervisor, you believe that lateness is unacceptable and are determined to address this problem. Start by defining the problem. In this case, the problem is that one of your staff is late every day and that lateness makes you angry. Note that the problem has two parts to it: the fact that the employee is late and the effects of the lateness on his or her work, and your reaction to the person being late. In this example, the lateness is only a problem because it bothers you. Step 2 involves breaking down the problems into smaller problems if necessary. However, in this case, the problem is relatively simple and doesn't need to be broken down any further. Step 3 involves brainstorming possible solutions. For example, possible solutions include: fire the employee, only pay the employee for the time spent at work, ask the employee to make up the time later, completely relax your rules regarding lateness, in other words, decide that all lateness is okay, relax your rules somewhat regarding lateness, For example, deciding that being up to 10 minutes late for work is acceptable, or simply ignore the problem. Next, evaluate the costs and benefits of each solution. For example, one benefit of firing the employee is that you would no longer have to be angered by the situation. On the other hand, firing the employee might lead to a wrongful dismissal suit, as well as making you feel very guilty and making your other staff members unhappy. Conversely, choosing the solution of somewhat relaxing the rules may work well. This solution will accommodate the employee's morning schedule without really affecting productivity in any way. If the employee believes that you are flexible, he or she may be more inclined to work harder. A potential cost of this solution is that other staff may start to arrive late as well. Or perhaps if you give staff members permission to arrive 10 minutes late, they will start arriving 30 minutes late. Once you evaluate the costs and benefits of each solution, you may find that none of the solutions is perfect. In the end, however, you will need to choose the best solution. If no solution seems potentially useful, take a break from the problem and come back to it later. Perhaps involving another individual in the problem-solving process will help. Another person may be able to generate solutions that were not obvious to you. Once you are able to choose one or more solutions that are likely to be effective, begin to develop a plan for implementing them. For example, if you decide to relax the rules regarding lateness so that being 10 minutes late is acceptable, how will you implement the rule? Will you make an announcement to all staff about the new rule? Or will you wait until someone is more than 10 minutes late to tell him or her about the new rule for acceptable and unacceptable lateness? When you have chosen a plan for action, carry it out as soon as possible. The longer you wait to solve the problem, the harder it may be to make the changes.